Margaret Murie was born as Margaret Elizabeth Thomas on August 18, 1902. Although born in Seattle, Washington, Marty, as so many people have taken to call her, grew up in the wilderness of Fairbanks, Alaska, after her parents had divorced and her mother remarried an assistant U.S. attorney who was posted there. As a young girl, Marty learned how to live in the outskirts of town while frequently making trips into Alaska's rugged forests. This is where she developed her love of Alaskan wildlife. Marty's adventures growing up in Alaska are chronicled in her book, Two in the Far North, and in a documentary, Arctic Dance. Published in 1962 and still in print, the book describes the winter night when she was 14 and Fairbanks caught fire, prompting her father and other men to burn the town's bacon supply as fuel to keep the steam-powered water pump running. When Marty turned 18, she began attending Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts, but ended up completing her degree in business administration at the Alaska Agricultural College and School of Mines, now called the University of Alaska. She was the first woman to graduate, which she did in 1924. Marty met Olaus Murie, a biologist in Fairbanks, and the two maintained correspondence while she completed her studies. The two were married in 1924 at a 3 a.m. sunrise ceremony in the village of Anvik on the Yukon River. The couple's honeymoon consisted of a 500-mile trip around the upper Koyukuk region by boat and dog sled, conducting caribou research for the U.S. Biological Survey. Between 1920 and 1926, Olaus, joined by Marty after their marriage, conducted an exhaustive study of Alaskan caribou, mapping migratory routes and estimating numbers. After that experience, the two agreed that theirs was a true partnership and that Marty would be at Olaus's side wherever his explorations took them. 3 years later, the couple moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, for Olaus to complete a study of elk. This is also where they could raise their 3 children. However, Marty was hardly a stay-at-home mother. Often, she accompanied her husband to his field sites and took notes on their excursions, and together they began working to expand the boundaries of national parks. These trips are highlighted in her book, as well as a later river journey taken with their infant son, Martin, strapped to their boat. In Jackson Hole, Marty served on the school board and campaigned to support education in the local library. She and Olaus loved to dance, and they helped organize dances for teenagers. During World War II, Marty did volunteer work, grew a victory garden, and managed a dude ranch. Although the couple never returned to Alaska to live after their move to Wyoming, for the next 2 decades, Marty and Olaus made many trips into the wilderness of Alaska.
Margaret's husband, named Olaus, worked in wildlife. His work began her career in conservation, as she became inspired by his work, and they would even work together. Margaret became fully immersed in the work when Olaus was appointed part-time director of the Wilderness Society. Once this promotion happened for the couple, they began to write articles, deliver speeches, and even protest for the protection of America's remaining wilderness. Margaret and Olaus began to wonder about conservation of the environment in Alaska and how they could aid the state. They were gaining much success from their work, but then decided to take it a step even further. This next step was for the couple to go to Alaska to pursue their goal of conserving the Alaskan wilderness. The goal of going to Alaska was to gather information about the state's wildlife in order to see how much environmental protection the area would require. Margaret and Olaus worked towards finding this information for a while. Their persistent efforts resulted in the making of the Arctic National Wildlife Range in 1960. This is a range of protected wilderness to result in a more conserved environment. Margaret was very happy with her and her husband's work in Alaska, so she decided to write a memoir about their experience. The memoir was titled Two in the Far North. Her memoir was widely recognized by those interested in environmental health, and she found great success in her writing.
At last, the wide sky, the wide land, broken and bare, but stretching far to the limitless blue sky of Wyoming. Room to breathe, to stretch one's soul's wings again. Here the big country still is. Always a joy to come back, to find it still big, still stretching away. Meeting and passing startling buttes which rise here and there, and dry watercourses, drift fences, once in a while a ranch house, and corrals nestling under cottonwoods and willows in one of those watercourses. Once in a while a few cattle, a band of antelope in the sage, and some horses galloping with the wind. A great bird and piece of golden sky can give one peace. Watch him as he soars and dips, a graceful pattern with no self-consciousness. There before a golden curtain, the mind, loosed and emptied of all edged and clattering thoughts, goes freely, floating out to meet the bird. We need such communion. We need to remember we are still animals.
After the memoir was published, Margaret and Olaus continued to work for environmental protection legislation. They worked extremely hard for the Wilderness Act to be passed, but her husband died right before this happened. Nevertheless, the Wilderness Act was passed and Margaret was thrilled. Margaret was able to persevere through the loss of her husband as she kept working to conserve the wilderness after he passed away. Still in Alaska, Margaret was assigned the task of identifying lands in Alaska that were in need of more protection. Even though she had a lot on her plate with this project, she was also able to work on the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, which was to be passed in 1980. This vital act ensured the safety of over 100 million acres of Alaska's wilderness. This unimaginable amount of land was all able to be conserved and protected with the help of Margaret Murie. Back to the Arctic National Wildlife Range set aside in 1960, the range was expanded and renamed the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This refuge turned out to be her largest achievement and what she is most memorable for today. Even though Margaret was able to make many positive changes in the Alaskan wilderness, oil drilling in Alaska remained a large issue because the state houses vital oil reserves beneath its surface. With this issue, there are still environmental improvements to be made in Alaska.
As old age limited Marty's mobility, she spent more and more time at her Wyoming ranch, which in 1968 she had promised to the National Park Service for its eventual inclusion in the Grand Teton National Park. However, this did not prevent her from amassing numerous awards and honors for her work. She received the Audubon Medal in 1980 and the John Muir Award in 1983, the Robert Marshall Conservation Award in 1986, and in 1990 the Murie residence was added to the National Register of Historic Places. She was made an honorary park ranger by the National Park Service and received an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from the University of Alaska. In 1997, the Murie Center nonprofit was established. Housed on the Murie Ranch, which is now a National Historic Landmark, it was created to carry on Marty and Olaus's conservation work. In 1998, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton. The following year, the revered activist was the subject of the documentary Arctic Dance, The Marty Murie Story, directed and produced by Bonnie Krebs and narrated by Harrison Ford. Nearing her 100th birthday in 2002, Marty was honored with the J.N. Ding Darling Conservationalist of the Year Award, the National Wildlife Federation's highest honor. On October 19, 2003, Marty died peacefully at her home in Moose at the age of 101. Margaret is known as one of the first women to take a leading role in America's conservation movement. To many, she is labeled as the grandmother of the conservation movement. She was very widely recognized for her work and is seen as a role model to younger women wishing to make a change.
John Denver was one of those friends who met Marty through their conservation work. They both continued fighting to keep the Arctic refuge wild.
It doesn't seem to me that we can ever take that for granted, though.
Oh,
It's always something that's going to have to be fought
you're
for,
right,
protected.
and you said it, and you're right. Yes.
Why have you worked so hard for the wilderness?
Because I was fortunate enough to have my life go in such a pattern that I spent a good deal of time in wilderness and felt perfectly at home in it. And I suppose I began to see too many instances of wilderness being destroyed.
Did you set out to make a difference? Is that something you thought about?
I don't think I thought about that consciously, no. I just was something that I thought I could help with and wanted to.
Was it for Olus, or was it for the two of you?
It was for him.
Was it?
Yeah. Because all of that was what he would have gone on and accomplished a great deal more if he'd been spared. And, yes, it wasn't easy.
Do you know that you have made an enormous difference?
I don't know about the word enormous. Do you think so?
Enormous? I think enormous.
You do?
I do.
Well, that's more than I deserve.